So here's where we're at with the funnel, okay? We just got done talking about the awareness stage. So I had Facebook come, they're an ad platform. And Facebook as a platform, they are one ad platform and one of many. And if you look at kind of what she talked about and recognize that she talked about these points just for Facebook, just for her platform. It kind of covered the concept of online ads and creative best practices and social ads, content creation, brand influencers, right? She talked about that. Details of social media management. These are all parts of that journey that she addressed that was just on this very early awareness phase. And this is just Facebook, right? And as an advertiser, you have a plethora of options. You have a lot of different things that you can do. And my mind, what I try to do is I try to boil it down, I try to conceptualize it, I try to simplify it. What are we talking about here? Well, I consider Facebook as a core advertising product, okay? And I kind of want to go through, and when you look back, just real quick, think of all the complexities that she talked about real quick. The difference of campaign objectives, reach versus conversions, different ad placements, making sure creatives are for the ad placement side, the images and the creatives and what goes into it, the headlines. You kind of keep going back and back. She said 90% of when you just put text into the image, 90% lift on that. And kind of the way that I think about this is that as an advertiser, to advertise successfully, you can't optimize for the ad platform if you don't understand the ad platform, right? And it would take a long time to be that subject matter expert, but you have to start at some place to build a threshold level of intelligence to know what it is that you're trying to influence the decision-making process on. I want you to become an ad platform expert. I want you to understand the different platforms, understand what you're buying, understand where your money goes, understand how drivers consume your ads, understand how you can drive efficiencies within the platform. So to kind of help in this process and to help define it, I thought it might be a good deal to kind of unpack this just a little bit. So core product, this is how I think of it. It's accessible by anybody. Anybody can go and access these platforms. They can spend money with them. Typically, they're self-manageable. You can do it on your own. You can be an expert. You can roll your sleeves up. You can go into Ad Manager. You can build the creatives on your own. The big thing, though, and this is the big key that I want to make sure that doesn't get missed for a core product, it has an audience base large enough that can support the results that you're paying for without having to buy traffic from other sources. I think this is the key that gets missed a lot. And so these platforms can support your traffic because they have audiences on your own. And so to kind of help paint this picture and to go through this, I'm actually going to try something here. We're going to see how this goes. I want everybody to get their phones out. Get your phones out and hear me, and let's do this. First step I want you to do is I want you to open up an internet browser, go to Chrome, and I want you to go to Google and type in the keyword trucking jobs. Now typically, what I think should happen here, it's a very competitive keyword, $10, $11, $12, $15 cost per click. You're going to see the top 4 listings are most likely going to be paid ads. They might be 3, it's probably going to be 4. And what I want you to do, we have a poll question now for you. So this is the first poll that we're going to ask. I want you to go to the app, find my session, and tell me what you see there in terms of who's buying that advertising. Is it a carrier? Is a carrier buying your advertising? Or is a vendor or a source or somebody else outside of the carrier, are they buying that advertising? And you're going to get a mixture of results. Every time that I load it, sometimes I see 4 carriers, sometimes I see 4 vendors, sometimes I see half and half. But if you can go to that poll and you can lock your answers in, I wanted to do this to just set the awareness to say, yes, it's a direct carrier buy, or no, it's a job board. A job board's buying from Google. And this is kind of that setting the stage of, is it a core audience or not? Google is a core audience. So here's the results that we have. So it's kind of changing, it's live coming in here. 4 carriers, 26%, 4 vendors, that's E, only 4%. Kind of in the middle, 21% of them, 2 carriers, 2 vendors. And so the vendors, I'm not going to get into the vendors and who's doing it and who's buying it, but it does happen, right? That's the only point I'm trying to make, is that there's going to be sources that you use from an ad platform perspective that they are doing things other than delivering results from their core audience. And it happens all throughout the industry. So just to re-clarify, and then we'll move on, 4 top spot paid ads, organic listing, Google search, core product. Why am I saying Google search is a core product? Because you went to Google, you were the audience, Google is showing an ad to you, they have you, just like Facebook, you're on Facebook platform, core audience. Let's for a minute just unpack this. Let's talk about Google Display. Another advertising mechanism that Google has. Here, in this example, I went to Washington Post. This is the website that I went to, and they have 2 ads showing up, two display ads, right? They got an ad here in the middle. You guys see these all the time. Anybody that's on the internet, you see display ads. They got a bottom little anchor. Those are called anchor ads, and Google shows that up. Okay, so I just want to have a rhetorical question. Another poll that we have, is Google display advertising a core product? And you guys are going to say, Travis is trying to trick me, so the answer is no. Or is it yes? I'm just kind of curious to see how everybody thinks about this. So yes, 100%. I'm not going to give you the answer. That's for your own interpretation. So don't look to me for an answer. I just wanted to kind of unpack the picture as to whether you think Google Display is a core product that Google offers. So most people, 80% are saying no, okay? And we can move on the slide. This is one of those things so that we can get into a philosophical debate about this, but here's the only point I'm trying to make. Is Google search, when you look at Google search in and of itself, they 100% sold you their own traffic. It was theirs. You can't take it away from them. That's what you bought. Google Display, they resold you somebody else's traffic. So Google went to Washington Post. Washington Post decided to inject ad code into their website that allows them to serve up the ad delivery network of Google. Google's the largest publisher brand that has the most inventory for paid ads. Publishers use Google to monetize their traffic. That's how publishers make money. And so Google created the platform of Google Display. This was called remarketing, right? This was about 10, 12 years ago. This didn't exist at the start of the internet. This is why Google grew into the monster that they are. They figured out how to monetize search, which was their core product. Then they figured out how to build the platform that allows other publishers on the internet to tap into their inventory so that the Washington Post can make money off of your dollars. And so in this case, Google did 2 things. Number 1, they built the platform, but number 2, they sold you their core audience. That's the point that I'm trying to make. And what you need to understand is that even at the Google level, which is a platform that you may say at knee-jerk reaction level, listen, it's a core platform, unequivocally, they're Google. All I'm trying to tell you is that if you dissect it, the argument could be made that half of their revenue from the display advertising side is not core platform. They're reselling somebody else's traffic. So even Google has to do this to get you leads. And so when you become an ad platform expert and you understand the methodologies of how each source uses to acquire their leads, it really helps you understand it. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but you as an advertiser, somebody that needs to spend money to get leads, you have an endless amount of options. All these core products, you've got proprietary platforms, different advertisers, vendors, job boards, people that you might use all throughout. You've got job board aggregators, different career search experiences. I mean, if we really sat down, there's probably hundreds, 200 easy plus options for you to put your money. And it's very, very, very difficult to advertise and to optimize efficiently when you don't understand the ad platform. Just like when Facebook came up, she walked through endless amounts of things to consider, and it gets complicated and it gets tough. And so this actually, Fred, you asked a question, how do you predict cost per leads? Can Facebook give you cost per leads? And so what I'm trying to do here is just unpack this understanding of how is it that you as an advertiser, how are you going to be able to decide what platform to use when you have no historical data to know what the performance of that platform is? And before we get to that point, I just need to run through why it's complicated. And so there's probably more than 7. I define 7 key factors that influence your cost per lead. This is me trying to go through and mind map everything. And so we're going to go through these. And number 1, difference in lead strategy. Okay, direct leads versus matched leads. a fundamental level, something that if you go to other industries, there's probably not as heavy of a concept of what's called, quote, a matched lead, or they might be referred to as multi-carrier leads. This is a different methodology of attracting leads for your company that if you buy matched leads from a source, you inherently are probably going to get a lot lower cost per lead on that than if you bought direct leads. So lead strategy, fundamentally at the top, that's going to change what the cost per lead is. Number 2, difference in ad platforms. Now this is a slide I used last year at the summit that we did in Birmingham. And when you think about the different ad platforms, think about that Google example I showed. They had search and display. Google had 2 different methodologies to how you could buy ads from their platform. Generally speaking, display advertising is a little bit lower intent. It's going to be a little bit higher volume, a lower cost per lead. When you do search advertising, it's much higher intent. When you were that example, you type in trucking jobs, you go to Google, you are already looking for something. When you do a display ad and you go to Washington Post, I'm looking at the news in Washington Post. I'm not a user that's looking for a job, but because the creative captured my attention, I decided to engage in the brand. And so the difference in the ad platforms, that's going to change cost per lead. So if you know that the platform in and of itself is going to have a different cost per lead, then asking the question, well, what's my cost per lead? You can't just compare cost per lead apples to apples from one source to another. You can once you have the data on the backside, and we're going to get to that. You don't have the data yet, just to answer that question. The third thing is the variety and the diversity of your jobs. And this is a big one, and this is the one that I'm going to talk about for a minute. What I've generally found is that companies that have more jobs, a broader diversity of jobs, they are the companies that have the opportunity to drive lower cost per leads. And why is that? Why would a carrier with 10 jobs have the opportunity to have lower cost per leads than a carrier with 1 job? Well, the demographics that are out there. Are you a company driver or are you a flatbed? Once you start specializing the type of driver you're looking for, the pool shrinks. There's not as many flatbed drivers as dry van drivers. There's not as many owner-operators, let's say, that's looking for work right now as students. And so once you kind of go through and you change up what it is you're looking for, the cost per lead is going to change across the job level. So here's an example. And what we do is we allocate budget for clients at the job level. We don't allocate budget at the source level. We try to understand what is the real-time cost per lead for a job regardless of source. And when we do that, the power of being able to influence cost per lead changes, because here's an example of a client, and for those in the back, you may not be able to see the numbers here, so I'll kind of spell them out. 18% of budget went to that second job, and they're coming in at a $28 cost per lead. There's the third job down, 14% of the budget coming in at 41. Well, there's differences to them. Just in the same company for the same job, the cost per lead changes. And so it's very difficult to predict what cost per lead is until you get a baseline of data. Typically, baseline of data, you need budget. You have to put money up to see what that is. And so I'm going to show you an example. So here is, this is our proprietary data. We have heat maps that show cost per lead. So this, we do a lot of advertising. This is normalized across all driver types, locations. This is everything all in. And I'm going to show this map several times over the next few slides. The deeper the red shade, the more difficult it is to find drivers, the higher the cost per lead in those markets. And so if you have 10 jobs, let's say that you have 10 different jobs, there's 10 circles, and each job is a 75-mile radius, but you tell your advertiser, I don't care what job you find, I want lowest cost per lead. What is the advertiser's goal going to be? They're going to put all the money into Florida, right? Because apples to apples, they can get you more leads out of Florida than they can in Portland or Seattle or one of those higher areas. So having diversity of jobs, and if all things being equal, it gives you the ability to target the jobs for performance that are performing better than those that are performing poorly. And if you are one of those carriers where you have one job, you're out of luck. Teasing. So size of hiring area. So this is the fourth thing, and this matters, okay? So at the very bottom, this is 3 different jobs side by side for a client that we work with. At the first job with a large hiring area, 182,000 drivers that we know about within our audience. And so we know the driver's information and where they work and all their things. And so 182,000 drivers on that job. You go to the local job at the 676 drivers. And so just the size of the hiring area, it kind of opens up the pool. That's going to change what your cost per lead is. So an example of here is that if you have a small hiring area and you happen to just have one example and you have to target that Fort Wayne, Indiana area, it is what it is. It's going to be tough. I mean, you don't have the optionality, and if your hiring area is small, it might be a challenge, but you have to get the data, and once you get that cost per lead, regardless of the source, it just becomes what your reality is for that job. Minimum qualifications, this is another one that changes. So this is an example of the exact same job, same criteria, same hiring area, nothing's changed about it. The only thing that I changed is on the far left-hand side, it's no experience required, all the way to the far right-hand side, 2 years required. So a company with no experience required, 131,000 drivers for that hiring area in this example, and then the far one, 45,000 drivers. And so it's not common, like as an advertiser, if we're trying to get lower cost per leads, it's not common for us to say, oh man, please, can you reduce your minimum qualifications? Like I know you can't do that. But there may be some sort of decision-making process internally that maybe some carriers do. Some carriers can change it. Some carriers I've seen that they will consider taking students on, or they will change from 18 months to 12 months. And that's kind of the evaluation path of most likely insurance and other type of factors that kind of are above potentially your pay grade as a recruiting director. But opening it up gives you more drivers in the pool. And so when you have more drivers in the pool, inherently what that probably means is you're probably going to get a lower cost per lead. So minimum qualifications matter. This is one that I think is illustrated really well with this slide. And it's tough for this one to conceptualize, but I'm going to try to do it. The amount that you spend matters. And let's take, what I did is I shaded in this common, I'm calling this a common OTR hiring area. Not on the Gulf Coast down south, not else on the seaboard, very typical area for hiring. And so if you are going to spend $1,000 or less, and there's 150,000 drivers out there, you have the luxury to target the areas that are cheap. Why do you have that luxury? Because you don't need as many drivers as what's in that whole pool. So when you target your ads, do you want to pay on Craigslist, for example, to target Chicago when you know that market is the absolute hardest? And so being able to get the data back that understands how hiring area impacts cost per lead, that might influence you to want to target areas that are drastically cheaper holistically, right? Well, in this case, if I'm spending $1,000, I might have the luxury to do that. If I spend $10,000, that small pocket, there may not be a big enough pool there. So what do you have to do? You have to expand. It's called geo-expansion. You have to get wider with your search. And so as you get wider with your search, you start going into markets that are more expensive. Well, what does that do for every new dollar tomorrow? It makes the proportional marginal lead you get more expensive. So lead 1 might have been $10. Lead 2 is now $20. The all-in average is 15. So the point here is that as you spend more, you're going to proportionally pay more marginally for that top result. It's called, and that's what's called diminishing returns. And then lastly, if you need to spend $10,000, you need to spend a lot of money, and these are just examples here, it's going to be different for everybody, you might not have the luxury to even start experimenting with only doing small geographical locations. You might just have to go the wide net right away holistically. But the amount that you spend, it does matter. And then lastly, the 7th point I made, and this is kind of more conceptual, I don't have a lot of data that supports this, but I do think this is the case. Market saturation, brand reputation, these matter. So let's say that you are a carrier and you only advertise on the I-5 corridor, and you've been advertising there for 5 years. And every driver's, Michaela talked about frequency of your ads and how you might get to a place where your ads are being so frequently seen that if you are putting a tremendous amount of money into it and drivers have already seen your ads 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, 15 times, holistically over time, it might get more expensive for you as you grow. And this really affects big carriers. Big carriers are the losers on this. It means that they have to advertise so much more because everybody's already seen their ads. And so head to head, a big carrier is probably going to have to pay more per lead than a small carrier because the small carrier, right, their ads haven't been seen as much. It's new, it's fresh. And so this is something to kind of be mindful of. And so just to recap, I mean, 7 things. We asked the question, well, what's the cost per lead? I get that question a lot, and as an advertiser, I want to be transparent, and I don't like giving clients the answer, I don't really know. I mean, we have to put budget. Your use case is different. We can try to guess, but even if we try to guess, we set ourselves up for false expectations. If I told you $25 and I came in at 50, well, now you're mad at me. And if I told you 50, but I came in at 25, well, now you're really happy. And so these things all matter. I wanted to make sure that we drove through this because it is complicated and there are a lot of factors. And so this next stage, I wanted to set that up from an ad platform perspective to run through this next segment called performance marketing simulations. And before I do that, I want to kind of tell you my story and define performance marketing, because I'm sure that a lot of people have kind of heard that word before. My first 2 years out of college, I worked for Heartland Express. I was one of 20 recruiters, and I worked job board leads. 2 years, I just had all various job boards. I was working those. And then I became a recruiting director, and I started having a little bit of budget to spend. I was responsible for budget. And at the peak, the highest budget I had was $40,000 a month. The lowest budget I had when I started was $6,000. And so the budget that I had as a recruiting director, when I was the one calling the shots of what ad platforms to use, it ranged between $6,000 to $40,000. And the biggest success that I found was that understanding where to put that budget made a huge difference in the overall success of how my department operated. And I had a vendor, and in full transparency, Randall Riley was one of the vendors that I had, and I was spending $10,000 a month with them. And at the time, I was spending money on truck stop magazine ads, various job boards. This was back in like 2014. And so the job board game back then, like the various niche job board, bestdriverjobs.com, bigrigjobs.com, I had about $3,000 on that across a collection of like 6 or 7 websites. This was at the dawn of remarketing. So that Washington Post example of how Google was showing ads, that's when that was just ramping up. So Randall Riley started doing remarketing ads. And so I had about $3,000 in that. And then I had budget in Google search, okay? So working with Randall, they approached me, and instead of me spending, on a line item invoice, instead of me paying Randall $1,000 for this product and $2,000 for truck stop magazine ads and $3,000 for display ads and $2,000 for search, they approached me and they said, hey, listen, we have a new model. It's called performance marketing. We're going to try to optimize across all the sources that we either have or that we manage for you, and we're going to try to put your money in the best places because we have the data and we think that we're going to be able to get you the best results. And so I said, cool, that makes complete sense. So instead of doing individual line items, I did $10,000 a month, and here's the check. And so for probably 10 years now, I would say that this thought process of, quote, performance marketing has been a thing. And so, but what I want to tell you and what nobody talks about and what I hope to articulate through these next different simulations, I want to unpack the challenges of true performance marketing. And I hope that you guys will come away with knowledge about why performance marketing at its face value is potentially complicated. And so how I do this and how I'm going to do this is I came up with five core variables that I believe dictates performance marketing. And those variables are the overall budget that you spend, okay? It's the quantity of the ad platforms that you use, whether it's Google, Facebook, ZipRecruiter, whether you use CDLLife. It's the number of jobs that you advertise based on your internal needs. So do you have 1 job or do you have 10 jobs? It's your historical cost per lead. What's your baseline? Your historical cost per lead. And the last thing is your recruiter bandwidth. And so think of these 5 variables as the guiding principles to dictate strategy from here on out as you think about your advertising. And so as I go through these simulations here, okay, on the left, we have a legend. And this, I have about 15 slides here, so that's going to be a locked legend. And I'm going to start inputting variables here. I'm going to input budget numbers, cost per leads, ad platforms in use, and I'm going to spit out data. It's just simple math. This is just math based off of the data that's put in, and we're going to walk through how this changes, okay? So the first example, I'm going to start with 2 variables. Real simple to understand, $10,000 budget, and you came in at a $38 cost per lead historically. Well, if you visualize what happens, if that's your life, if that's where you're at, I want you to understand everything that we talk about. We're going to break everything down into monthly spend and monthly results, and then we're going to break it down into daily. Most ad platforms, they spend money by the day. Okay, so when you give money to Facebook, you're giving daily budget to buy impressions for the auction that Michaela talked about. When you give Google money, Google spends money by the day to decide whether or not you show up high in search listings. So most people, just to start off, they never think of daily. You think of monthly, but daily is how ad platforms operate. So you need to start thinking about daily. Don't think of monthly, think of daily. So in this example here, $10,000, on $38 cost per lead, 263 leads overall for the month. Now, I know nothing. In this example, I know nothing about your recruiting department. I don't know whether you need 4 drivers, 5 drivers, 20 drivers a month. I know nothing. The first thing, if you're a recruiting director, on your budget, on your simulation, is 263 leads for that budget enough? Now, we haven't defined what we're going after, but 8.77 leads a day. So that's what's going to happen. So you take that money, 8.77 leads a day. If you have 3 people in your recruiting department and you spend $10,000 a month and you're generating 8.7 leads a day, first thing, do you need 3 recruiters to manage 8.7 leads a day? And so that's what I'm trying to point the picture of. And so do you know, if you do just those 2 variables, do you know whether or not your recruiting department is set up for success? Just look at what the metrics tell you, break it down by day, and just ask yourself the question, do I think I'm set up for success here? Well, I'm going to circle back to this slide later, but this is a real simulation, this is real data, and the goal that we want to get to understand the whole funnel is I need to understand what your ratio is. Let's assume that I've never worked with you in the past. The first thing I'm going to ask to determine whether or not you're set up for success is what's your lead to hire ratio? Do you know that? And this example for this client, they had a 49-to-1 lead to hire ratio. So now that I have that piece of information, now that I have that data, I can go back to this model and I can say, well, based off of your historical recruiting department, regardless of the sources you're using right now, we can try to optimize the source later. But just at the fundamental level for what's been happening, you're going to get 5.36 hires for that spend, if that's your lead to hire ratio. And in this example, if they said, well, I need 10 hires a month, well, it's not going to work. You can't get there. So that's simulation 1. Simulation 2, let's take that same logic. We're going to keep budget the same at $10,000. We're going to keep cost per lead at $38. But we're going to say, you know what, I got $10,000 to spend. Let me allocate this budget across 5 sources. Let me use Facebook, let me use Google, let me use Craigslist. You pick them, you're equally allocating the budget. When you do that, as we continue on, the yellow rows are the new data. Anything in white, it's previous data we've already talked about. So spend per ad platform. So now you've got $2,000 to spend. So now you're giving that ad platform $66 a day. And when you rationalize the amount of leads that come from that platform, you're saying that this one ad platform is going to get you 52 leads for the month, 1.75 leads a day. And so just understanding the data, it tells a different story once you take it to this level. And so in my view, to optimize, if we're talking about let's optimize for the ad platform now, you need lead flow from that ad platform to know how to optimize that ad platform. There are too many variables that ad platform has at your disposal for optimizations that if you're only getting 50 leads a month from the ad platform because you've watered budget down so great, you probably are making decisions to cancel vendors, to pull budget before that platform in and of itself really even had the opportunity to tell you how good they could be. And so I can't even take you to the ad platform because we're set up for failure from the very start. You've only given them enough budget for 50 leads. So, and then assuming this, let's go back to the lead to hire ratio. Assuming you're at a 49 lead to hire ratio, and everybody's number will be different, you're going to get 1 hire per month per platform. And this is not even discussing other variables like what happens if time per hire is 45 days. So from the minute you place advertising with a new source, you have to wait, 45 days, 50 days? Are you waiting 90 days? What's the attribution window that you know it takes from the time to hire? And so the other thing that could happen is that you've only given enough budget in this example for 49 leads. The data tells you that you're probably only going to get 1 hire, and you might have moved on from that source after 1 month because no hires have came in yet. And so, okay, well, I spent $2,000, no hires. Okay, well, half of that budget didn't even spend until the last half of the month. And so these are just complexities. Me being so close to the advertising and how it works, these are challenges that advertisers have that I don't think too common. A lot of carriers really appreciate the level of complexity that goes into the delivery of the budget, let alone optimizing for the ad platforms. And so kind of the takeaway that I think about, and this is tough, this is more intuition, but you need to avoid the 401k approach to media planning. Now, if you have a super large budget, then you're probably okay, right? Because you have enough budget that it's for you, you're going to have enough spend trickling out that you do get the data back. But if you're a small carrier and your budget is limited, if you spend your budget too wide, what happens is that most sources are not going to have the opportunity to A/B test optimizations, okay? They don't have money to experiment on new placements, new platforms, new areas. You don't have enough time to work the leads. If you spend too narrow, okay, you might experience diminishing returns. So back to that Facebook model on the frequency. And if you're getting to 5 or 6 or 7 times your ad is being seen by one person, well, if you're spending 10 grand with Facebook and you're spending that money in a 50-mile area, and it's a small area, you probably are over-allocated. And so in that example, you're spending too narrow. You need to actually expand. And so it's very complicated. There's never going to be a silver bullet. It's always going to be unique to your case. Let's kind of move on. Simulation 3. Let's add number of recruiters to the platform. And the reason I'm going down this path is because we're here today to talk about the overall funnel. And the role your recruiters play in that funnel is super important. But my days as a recruiter, kind of knowing working job board leads and knowing kind of my work list, if you will, I know how competition is. I know that when I was one of 20 recruiters with Heartland Express, that there might be certain days that I get more leads than others. Well, if you just run this through in this same simulation model, if you have 3 recruiters for the month, okay, for the month, you're only going to get 17 leads per platform. And daily, you're getting 0.58 leads per platform per recruiter. Okay, and so now you see kind of how the watered down effect happens as you add on these other variables, which are variables that all carriers have. You all have these things. So, so at face value, you got $10,000 healthy budget. You're spending with 5 ad platforms. You feel really good. You feel like that you've diversified the budget. There's bound to be some good ones and some bad ones. You've got 3 recruiters, so you got a pretty healthy size. So for the size of your carrier, you're doing really well. And then your recruiters are kind of operating, and you've given them 0.58 leads per day per platform, 2.92 leads overall for the day. Okay, and so is that enough? And my takeaway here is that your recruiters are the first line of defense against sources with poor lead quality. And this is probably something that as an advertiser, we don't get this feedback fast enough. Okay, if I do data analytics and if we are kind of in control of your funnel and we're understanding it, then the data over time isn't going to lie. I have funnel data that I can share with you over time, but why would I wait 2, 3, 4, 5 months afterwards to get the data to tell me? Don't we want the recruiters to have the awareness that, hey, guess what, recruiting team, I tried this new source. I got $5,000 lined up for him. Here's where the ads are going to be. Here's what the copy says. Here's what the images say. Here's the awareness of how we're advertising. So when the driver calls in, you have the awareness of how they saw the ad. What creative did they see? What headline did they see? How do you start the conversation off? And if they're only getting 0.58 leads a day from that ad platform, can they be your first line of defense? Are they even going to have the awareness of whether or not this ad platform is good or bad? They're hardly even able to experience what that ad platform is doing for you on a quality level. So the next couple things, I kept using this example, $10,000, $10,000. I'm going to keep everything else the same. Let's keep cost per lead at $38, ad platforms at 5, recruiters at 3. I'm going to change budget. We're going to look at $10,000, $30,000, and $90,000. So now the budget's starting to get a little bit varied. And on the first chart, the first one on the left, that one is the example that we've been given historically up to this point. So the 2.92 leads per day per recruiter. Well, now let's look at it on the $30,000 example. If the metric that you care about is leads per recruiter overall for the day, okay, 8.77 under the $30,000 budget range. If you got $90,000, now the recruiters are getting 26 leads a day. So now you're able to kind of start putting expectations behind what you think your budget needs to be. So if you are a recruiting director and you're tasked with hiring 30 drivers a month, and your boss or the leadership of your company said, hey, we have to spend $30,000, I would suspect that most CFOs at companies, most higher executives, when the data is presented to them this way, when you can tell them, listen, you want me to do something that is physically not possible. Here's why it's not possible. I'm only getting my team 2.92 leads a day, or whatever the number is. But by knowing the number, it tells you the awareness of what might be needed to get to the goal that you have. What we're here today to talk about is that budget isn't the only thing. You don't just have to pay for leads, and so there's ways to optimize outside of just budget. If I look at this overall funnel, go back to that 49-to-1 ratio of leads to hires. And I can do a projection now to say, well, on this $10,000 hire one, I'm going to get you 5.36 hires if the data holds. On this $30,000 one, you're estimated to get 16 hires. On the $90,000, 48 hires. And so this is kind of how, in my view, you goal yourself and how you figure out whether or not you're even set up to meet your objectives with what you got. I said that it's not just about spending money, though. Decreasing cost per lead has similar outcomes. Let's do an example where the cost per lead goes from 19 or 38, that was the baseline. I'm going to show you an example going to 19 and one going up to 57. And these are cost per leads that I think are pretty reasonable. These are not, overarching, crazy numbers to hit. Well, if you get to $19 cost per lead in this same simulation, you go from 5.36 hires to 10 hires. You didn't have to spend any more money. And now hopefully you get my point about how giving time and experimenting with and being an ad platform expert and picking the right sources to use, how this has huge impacts into your success outside of just budget. There are variables that you can control that are going to get the end outcome you want, which is the hire, without having to just always spend more money. If you can't change your advertising budget, which I know us marketers, we would love you to, just spend more money. If you can't do that, okay, you've got to look at other ways to meet your goals. And there's many different ways to do it, and we're still going to go through several of this stuff here. So how do you do it? How do you, without additional budget, how do you achieve your goals when you know that after you've looked at the simulation that you are not set up for success? Well, what areas should you focus on? Do you do social media management today? Would that give you a 2% lift? How are your landing pages? Are your landing pages articulating the message? Would that give you a better conversion rate once the driver got to the landing page? Are your recruiters prioritizing those leads fast enough, knowing that they're only going to get X number and knowing that they're costing X dollars? Are you comfortable with how your recruiters are doing? That 49-to-1 ratio, that's terrible. If you get that to 25-to-1, and you just convert the leads better, then you get double the results by just focusing on that one metric, right? So there's a lot of different things that you can do to optimize. And then this last thing, because I said the number of jobs that you have gives you a lot of advantages to know how to decrease your cost per lead. Let's just do the same simulation for a second, and we're going to throw in the complexity of jobs now. We're going to say that you're a carrier, that you have 4 jobs. And so look what happens. Look how this gets watered down to a level that's just insanity. If you've got $10,000 budget and you gave budget to 5 ad platforms, and you told every ad platform, in Facebook you had 5 ad sets, in Google you ran 4 search campaigns. If you watered it down to target each job separately, What ends up happening per platform, per job, you're only going to get 13 leads a month per platform, per job. Only 0.44 leads a day per platform, per job. And so when you say, okay, take my money, but I want you to focus on these 4 jobs, and every job has a different hiring area. You got owner-operators on one side, company drivers on the other side, and you've diversified your budget. You've diversified your budget at the ad source level, but it came back and it bit you in the butt because you're doing too many jobs across too many sources. And there's just not the budget for anybody to do anything when the goal is to allocate money at the job level. And it's just tough. It's just, you don't have enough juice. And so this is why what ends up happening, this is why some advertisers do general campaigns. So you probably heard that a lot. Hey, we're going to do a general campaign for you. Or I'm not going to allocate money at the job level. I'm just going to do a general campaign. Well, one, general campaigns are easier. It doesn't take as much time. It's more effort for us to run jobs individually at the job level. If you run a general campaign, you have more budget. So the reason you might have to do a general campaign is because the budget's so thin at the job level that you have no choice but to consolidate budget at the general level. But what do you miss if you do campaigns at the general level? You miss the diversity of knowing what the performance is at the job level. If you have lease, company, and owner-operators, is your goal for success, do you have an amazing lease program and a subpar company driver package, and the lease program needs to be what you're leading with? If you never advertise money at the job level and track the data at the job level, how do you know where you stack up against each other? And when you allocate so much money to so many sources, and they have to then allocate money, they can't do job level advertising. And so I ran through all these simulations to just paint the picture that at face value, a $10,000 company spending money on 5 ad platforms makes a lot of sense. If you just look at the data, it starts telling a whole separate story. And so here's what we've done, okay? I have, that was just simple math. All those simulations are simple math. I took all that data. If you go to CDLLife.com, you go to the Advertise With Us page, you're going to see this link here under lead generation called Performance Marketing Calculator. If you go to that link, it's going to have these 5 core variables for you. You can type in your inputs. You can type in, it's going to spit out all the data for you to see the mathematical breakdown of what I just said for everybody here. And so it's not something you have to do. We're not asking for your contact information. This isn't behind a paywall. We won't even find out who you are. So if you go to this page and you type this in, it will give you that same math. Do that experiment, see what flushes out, and then present that to leadership to say, hey, listen, I just discovered something. Do you realize that we're using 10 ad platforms? We get $10,000 a piece going, and each ad platform, we have this many jobs. There's certain data points. We're only getting this many leads per day for our recruiters. So I wanted to make sure that you guys had that as a takeaway, because I think that's very powerful to make sure that you understand that. And so here's my view, okay? Here's what needs to happen. Remember, I defined performance marketing. I said, hey, listen, back in the day it was Randall, one budget, hey, just split it out and do everything. We, as an industry, need to redefine how we think about performance marketing. And to do that effectively, there are 3 tiers, and I've defined this, and this is how I view it. 3 tiers to performance marketing in today. Tier number 1, if you use CDLLife as a source, I get your cost per lead data back. I don't need that information from you. I already have it. So when I spend money on your job, I spend money on your campaign, I know without your input that this is your cost per lead per job. So having that gives me the ability to move money around at the job level, but that's passive, requires no work from you guys. What we need to do is we need to get to the place where hire data is going back to sources and vendors so that the optimization can happen at the higher data level. And so this is what I call tier 2. I would prefer this. I don't want cost per lead. I need hires coming back. The reason I need hires coming back is because that's going to tell me the information I need to know to move money around to the right platforms. And so what I'm talking about here is examples of how powerful hire data are. These are our internal hire data tools that we have for our clients. And we have the overall budget at the top. And then we have the overall funnel. Here's how many leads. In this example, 54 leads per hire. So that's a number that we know holistically. And then we compute What is the cost per lead and the cost per hire and the ratio of how many leads per hires at every source level? And above and beyond that, we tell you the time to hire. We say, listen, if I get hire data back, I know what sources I used. I can go through here and give you the information intelligently. The data will never lie. It's going to guide us to the right place so that we are picking the right ad platform. So those 200 ad platforms that are out there, let's not guess. Let's do a data-driven approach to how we're going to optimize your budget. And if you don't provide this to your sources, you are going to always be on that cost per lead level. You're never going to be able to mature from an intelligence perspective. So that's a big thing. The last thing, and this is the most crucial, this is the part that actually is even more important. This is providing all applicant data back, all budget data, all information back so that we can have the overall macro funnel of what happens for carriers. So on the side here, on the left-hand side, we have lead apps, full apps, processing, approved, orientation, and hired. These are the generic categories. Everybody calls their stages different. Instead of processing, you might call it ready for review. Instead of approved, you might be ready for hire. So however you call your stages, that's fine. But we can all agree that there are stages to the process. And what we want to do, not just at the macro level, we want to do this at the vendor level, the source level. We want to understand things like this source got me 7,200 leads, 976 of them turned into full apps. Well, 13% in this example turned into full apps. Hires, 2% from this source turn into hires. And what this tells you is this tells you how to optimize outside of just lead generation. In this example, if you look at orientation scheduled, where's the drop off in this funnel? 363, and this is real data from a carrier, by the way, 363 drivers approved, 191 got scheduled. They only had a 52% ratio of closing the approved drivers to scheduled. But once they got the drivers to orientation, 76% of them became hired. So in this funnel, when I evaluate this and you ask me to put my thumb on the scale, I'm saying, well, it's probably not advertising. You've got 363 people approved. That's the problem. You only got half of them from approval to orientation. What's missing on this process? Are your recruiters engaging enough? Do you send them the right emails, the right drip marketing, the right thank you messaging? In that video example that we showed, did you just wait 5 days to tell them that they're approved? Whatever the case is, that tells me where to look now that I know that data. The same data can also be correlated at the cost per event level, right? So what you can do here now is you can say, okay, it's one thing to know the volume. Let's now understand the cost per event. $46 per lead, but $300 per app. If I'm a recruiter and you're my boss and I know that the company is paying $346 for full app, I get that Intella app in or I get that Universal app in, it's ready to go, right? If I knew that was a $350 cost, do you think that I'm going to feel a little bit incentivized to know that my obligation is to work that full app at a level because I'm paying $346 for it? Like the data just tells stories that without it, you can't operate. You make decisions with no baseline for accuracy. So this is why it's important. And then when we take this data and we compare source level against it, we're going to compare source A to source B. So we do a filter on the funnel data and we actually compare sources. And when you do this, you can start finding out which sources are the ones that drive quality versus which ones are the sources that drive leads. And this is crucial. So source A, only 15% of their leads made it to full apps versus source B, 34% leads went to full apps. So going back to why predicting cost per lead is tough, well, the ad platforms are different. The one on the right, source B, could be Google search. The one on the left could be Facebook display. Intentness changes. Due to intentness of the advertising platform changes, we would expect the ratios to change. Taking this to the higher funnel, cost per event level, that same source A, $85,000 budget, a $5,700 cost per hire. Source B, $17,000 budget, came in at $1,000 cost per hire. So in terms of diminishing returns, moving money, now that you have the data, you can now operate from the foundation that you can pick the sources that you want to use that drives the results you're looking for. If you don't have this information, it is impossible to project it, predict it, or change it. So this needs to be an evaluation path that's happening every week, not monthly, every week. You need to keep engineering this. And so by doing that, okay, by having a dashboard that allows you to see lead metrics, application metrics, processing metrics, approved metrics, on any given time, now that the data is flowing, now we can go see the comparisons. We could say, hey, this month we have 54 more approvals this month than the previous period, or we're down, or we're up. And so now it starts kind of alerting you to potential problems before they manifest, before your performance just entirely decays. The other thing we can do is we can look at the exact same funnel data in table view across all sources you're using. So instead of, let me go back, instead of looking in totality, it's tough to compare sources like this if you're looking at the source for one funnel, right? But if you look at it this way, and you're kind of doing the color coding to kind of find the outliers, now you can quickly find the outliers for every stage. What source drives the highest ratio of full apps? What source is the lowest cost per lead? What source has the highest ratio of, the worst ratio of leads to hires? Well, if you have 2 recruiters and you're getting 20,000 leads, you don't have the recruiter volume to support it, that might be a source you want to cut because it's taken. It might have a good cost per hire, but the ratio is so bad that it burns up your recruiter's time. There's too many things that matter for performance that without the data, you are operating blind. And this is the one area I say that carriers miss completely. Very few carriers can tell you this, and this is the thing that's most important. So the biggest thing that I'm going to tell you today, you're going to go through all the funnel data, you're going to go through all the stages, you have to get this into place. If you do not have this into place, you operate from zero. And so I'm really going to stress that you get this done. And we've built this. We have this ready to go. And so performance marketing, okay, let's talk. Performance marketing is still a good thing. I'm not advocating that performance marketing is the right way to do advertising, but you have to do it intelligently. You have to use the right products and the right sources and the right scalability with data, with automation, with machine learning so that your advertising budget at the job level, at the ad platform level, with the data, and you do that very, very, very well. And go back to that Google example. So CDLLife, so those clients here that use us, 70% of our leads come from our core products. So these are products that we have an audience that we own, that we put your money on job boards, on mobile apps, on our ad delivery network, on our email campaign. 70% of all of our leads come from our core products. Well, we can't support results at scale without relying on managed products. And by doing managed products for companies intelligently, we are able to put money on products that drives a better ROI in the moment through performance marketing, okay? So performance marketing of today is the right combination because what happens here on these core products is that you gotta be very careful because when you spend money with sources, they go back and buy from core products. And so you'll end up having 3 vendors do Facebook for you, 5 vendors that do Google for you, and the data just gets a mess. You can't do it. And so that's the point. We have to redefine it. We've got to allocate budget at the job level. You've got to have the data. You've got to have the funnel intelligence. And you've got to know the baseline for success that you have. And so I said spending money is more than just, being successful is more than just buying leads. And that very well is true. We have to get the data in and we have to know what the ad platforms are. So that is the basic overview. That's the overall message I wanted you guys to hear. It's very complicated, but I think that if you guys get the data in and you understand it and you understand the ad platforms, you're going to come out of here set up so much more for success for tomorrow by just investing the time focusing on those 2 things. So. How do I explain to my supervisor why it's so necessary to provide higher data to our vendors? All right, so this one, I have personally lived this, right? The challenge here is that higher data is precious and you want to protect it. And there's a moral hazard here. If you are a carrier and you gave all of your hires over to a source, that's like your gold mine. That's your lifeblood of your company. You just gave that away. And so it's kind of, you got to find that striking balance of providing the higher data, which is going to get you the ROIs you need, versus trying to protect your data so that there's no fear that that data is going to be used. And what I would tell you is that, number one, logically, you need to explain why it needs to be shared. And talking logically through it and going through the optimizations, I think a lot of people would come away from the data to say, it makes sense. I do need to share it because by sharing it, I can see why it's so powerful. So that's the first thing, defining for your leadership why it's needed, okay, and how it's going to help the company. The second thing is putting insurances in place that the information is going to be protected. These are legal agreements, these are data security agreements, these are agreements that the information gets shared with your vendors in a very security-driven way. I'm not going to talk too techie here, but there are ways programmatically where the data can be shared over that is randomized and anonymized. And so there are ways to get it where like you don't have to be concerned with it getting out there. The biggest fear would be if you don't trust your vendor and you think they're going to take your data and upload it to their custom list of retargeting, then that's the biggest fear, right? So that's a big one. That's a great first question. But it's really, really important, and it's going to save tens of, I mean, the bigger you are, the more you spend, the more sharing that higher data is going to save you thousands in cost.